Hi, my name's Daniel, and I worked 5 jobs, 5, just to keep us afloat. While she smiled, called me her personal ATM, and behind my back, she laughed, said I was the cow of the century. I thought I was saving our marriage, but what I overheard that night, it didn't just break me. It rewrote everything I believed about love, loyalty, and her. And the worst part? The betrayal didn't come with screaming. It came with silence, the kind that poisons slow. So ask yourself, what would you do if the woman you trusted most was building your destruction with your own hands? The house was quiet in the way it only gets late on a weekday. Not peaceful, just still. The kind of quiet that settles after everyone else has gone to bed and the day's noise has finally run out of energy. The kitchen light was the only one on. A pale yellow circle over the table, the counter, the sink with a single mug drying upside down. I sat there with my checkbook open, pen resting between my fingers, staring at the numbers I already knew by heart. The amount was written neatly. No memo. There never was. I hesitated for half a second before signing Mick's my name, not because I couldn't afford it, but because my hand was tired, not sore, just heavy, like it had been doing this same motion for years without anyone noticing. I tore the check carefully, folded it once, and slid it into an envelope. I didn't seal it yet. I rarely did until the morning. It gave me the illusion that I still had a choice. I didn't think of myself as generous. I thought of myself as responsible. There's a difference. Generous people expect gratitude. Responsible people expect silence. My days ran on a schedule that only made sense if you didn't stop to think about it. I was up before sunrise for the first shift. Coffee still too hot to drink when I pulled out of the driveway. That job paid steady, but not much. It was the kind of work people depended on without ever learning your name. By late morning, I was somewhere else entirely. Changing shirts in the car, wiping my face with a napkin from the glove compartment. I ate when I could, usually something I could hold with one hand. By mid-afternoon, my back stiffened, my knees complained, and I told myself I'd stretch later. I rarely did. Evenings belonged to another place, another set of people who knew me only as the guy who showed up on time and didn't ask questions. When that ended, I didn't go home. Not yet. There was still one more thing to do. Night security paid by the hour and asked for nothing but alert eyes and patience. I sat in my car, engine off, seat leaned back just enough to rest. Sometimes I closed my eyes for a minute, not to sleep, just to let the noise in my head settle. When my phone buzzed with an alert or a movement sensor tripped, I was back upright, doing what I was paid to do. 5 jobs, no applause. No witnesses, just deposits and withdrawals, hours, traded for numbers on a screen that never seemed to shrink the way I expected them to. I told myself this was what marriage looked like when things got hard. You didn't keep score. You didn't complain. You handled it. That's what men my age were taught, whether anyone ever said it out loud or not. My wife never asked how many hours I'd worked. She didn't need to. She knew the results. The bills were covered. The balance moved in the right direction. When money came up, her tone was casual, almost light, like it was a shared inconvenience rather than something being carried mostly on one back. You took care of it, right? She'd say, already moving on to the next topic. I always had. She never asked if I was tired. She didn't ask what my day looked like. Not because she was cruel. That's what I told myself. She just assumed. And assumptions are easy when someone keeps proving them right. There were moments, small ones, that didn't sit quite right. A joke about money said too quickly. A comment that landed just a second late. The way she talked about our situation like it was temporary for her and permanent for me. I noticed. Then I dismissed it. Everyone gets stressed. Everyone says things they don't mean. That was the story I stuck to, because it was easier than pulling at a thread I wasn't sure I wanted to see unravel. I finished preparing the envelope and set it on the counter, right where she'd see it in the morning. The pen went back into the drawer. The light stayed on for a moment longer while I stood there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint sound of someone turning in their sleep down the hall. As I reached for the switch, a thought crossed my mind. It didn't arrive with drama. It didn't demand attention. It just settled there, quiet and uncomfortable. If I ever stopped paying, who would I be to them? I didn't answer it. I turned off the light and let the house go dark. I didn't know it then, but that question was already waiting for an answer. I didn't know it then, but that question was already waiting for an answer. A few days later, I found myself outside a local restaurant. Nothing fancy, just a family-style spot with good ribs and cold tea. It was early evening. The sun hadn't fully set yet, and the parking lot glowed in that soft orange light that makes everything look more forgiving than it is. We were there for a small dinner. My wife, her sister, and a couple of friends from her book club. I was mostly there to drive. She liked having me close, but not too close, like a ride share that knew when to shut up. Inside the restaurant, things were light, chatty, surface level. I mostly smiled and nodded when needed, looking around the table like someone trying to read a room where everyone spoke a different language. Then the check came. It sat there in the middle of the table for maybe half a second before someone made a joke about splitting it. That's when my wife laughed and said, "Don't worry, he's got it. He always does. He's basically my personal ATM." There was a ripple of laughter around the table. One of her friends added, "Well, shoot, where can I get one of those?" More laughter. I smiled too, but not with my eyes. I'd been called worse, sure, but never in public, never with that much ease. The joke itself wasn't what stung. It was how quickly it came, how practiced it sounded. Like she'd said it before. Like I wasn't a person sitting right there, but a role everyone was comfortable assigning me. We left not long after. I paid without saying a word, and no one offered otherwise. As we walked back to the car, my wife was already scrolling on her phone. "Hey," I asked gently, "do you still have those documents from the accountant? The ones about the restructuring thing?" She didn't even look up. "Which ones?" "The ones we talked about last week, about the new debt plan." "Oh," she said, waving it off. "You wouldn't understand the papers anyway. It's fine." Her voice wasn't cold. That was the part that hit me. If she'd snapped or rolled her eyes, I might have had something to react to. But it was calm. Like she was explaining to a child why he couldn't drive the car yet. No anger. Just certainty that I didn't belong in that part of the conversation. In the car, I turned on the radio and let it fill the silence. She kept tapping on her screen. I didn't ask more. The night moved forward as if nothing had happened. But something had. I drove slower than usual. Not because I was tired, though I was, but because I needed more time. More space to let what she'd said settle. Personal ATM. You wouldn't understand the papers. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just kept driving, hands on the wheel, eyes ahead. It's strange how humiliation doesn't always feel loud. Sometimes it arrives like a soft whisper that takes hours to stop echoing. Back home, she went straight to the bedroom. I stayed in the garage for a bit, sitting in the car with the door half open, listening to the quiet outside. No neighbors, no traffic, just that hollow sound of nothing important happening. For the first time, I didn't feel overworked. I felt invisible. I didn't make a scene. I didn't start a fight. I told myself it wasn't worth it. That people say things without thinking. That maybe she was tired too. That maybe I was too sensitive. But deep down, I knew I wasn't making excuses for her. I was making them for me. For why I kept showing up, kept paying, kept being the one who didn't ask for anything back. And then it hit me. Respect doesn't vanish in one blow. It slips away quietly, in the pauses between words, in the jokes that aren't really jokes, in the way someone decides you no longer need to be informed, just managed. That was the night I realized respect doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes. By the time we pulled into the driveway, the street was dark, porch lights blinking on across the neighborhood like everyone had silently agreed it was time to call it a night. My hands stayed on the steering wheel long after she went inside. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. I didn't even take off my seatbelt, just sat there, watching the shadows stretch across the dashboard. My ears still echoed with her voice from earlier. You wouldn't understand the papers anyway. Not cruel, not even annoyed, just final. Eventually, I got out, locked the car, and went in. The house was quiet. Too quiet for how loud my mind had gotten. I moved through the hallway with muscle memory more than thought, stepped into the bedroom without turning on the light. She was already in bed, on her side, back facing me, the way she always slept now. I didn't speak. I just sat on the edge of the bed, tugged off my shoes, stared at the floor. Then I got back up and made my way to the kitchen. I wasn't hungry, but I needed something. Maybe just the routine of making coffee, though it was far too late for that. Instead, I poured a glass of water and leaned on the counter. And that's when the reel started playing in my head. Not the highlight reel, the other one, the quiet one. The one you ignore while it builds in the background. It hadn't always been this way. We got married late in life. I'd been divorced once. She'd never married. I thought we understood each other's baggage. Grown folks, grown choices. That kind of thinking. At first, everything seemed normal. Bills showed up like they always do. But then, there were more of them. Credit cards I hadn't seen before. Emails about rolling balances and temporary setbacks. I remember the first time I asked, just lightly, not accusatory, what some of those numbers meant. She had smiled, tucked a loose hair behind her ear, and said, "It's nothing, just a little past due on something old. I've got it under control." And I believed her. Every time something new popped up, a loan I hadn't heard of, a consolidation plan that needed a signature, there was always a reason, always a promise. Temporary. We're fixing it. Just a bit more time. But it kept coming, and I kept signing, not because I didn't know better, but because I wanted to believe marriage meant absorbing hits together, that if I walked away, I was quitting on more than just the problem. I was quitting on her. You don't leave someone just because things get tough, I'd said once to my brother when he asked if I was okay. Now I wasn't so sure that was wisdom. It might have just been fear dressed up as loyalty. I finished the water, set the glass down, and turned to head back to the bedroom. She was still awake. I could tell by the way her shoulders shifted when I stepped into the room. "I left the gas card on the counter," she said without turning. "Can you fill the tank tomorrow morning? It's low again." "Yeah," I replied. No edge, just a flat line. She gave a soft laugh, one that didn't match anything, and said, "That's why I married you. Always dependable." Then she glanced back at me, over her shoulder, and added, "The most reliable ATM I've ever had." There it was again, the word. But this time, she said it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It wasn't teasing. It wasn't nervous. It was solid, settled. A smirk, small but sharp, like she knew exactly how those words landed, and didn't care. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Something cold moved through my chest, but I stayed still. I climbed into bed without another word, facing the opposite wall. I listened to her breathing slow and even out while mine stayed shallow. I wasn't thinking about the bills or the hours I worked anymore. I was thinking about that smile. And I finally admitted to myself something I hadn't dared before. The debt wasn't just numbers, it was power. She didn't need me for money. She needed me to believe that paying was the only way to matter, and I had played right into it. All that time, I thought I was helping, saving, providing. But maybe I was just convenient. By the time the sun started peeking through the blinds, I was still awake. And the question from before returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't, "How much do I owe?" anymore. It was, "Who am I to her, really?" I didn't bring it up again. Not the smirk, not the money, not even the question that had kept me awake. I worked my shifts, checked off the tasks, and kept my tone even when I spoke. But I carried it with me, quietly, like something you don't want to admit you're bleeding from. 3 nights later, we were invited to a dinner at Mark and Sheila's place, some old friends from her side. They hosted once a month, casual, potluck style, no tablecloths or candles, just folding chairs and laughter that bounced off the kitchen tiles. I didn't want to go. I'd just gotten off a shift and hadn't even changed. My back was sore, and I still had salt from dried sweat on my collar. But she insisted, said they hadn't seen us in a while. "It's just dinner, babe," she said. "Don't overthink it." So I went. I brought a bottle of wine I couldn't afford, and a pie from the corner store. The house was warm and smelled like rosemary and chicken. People greeted me with the same polite smiles they always did. I returned them, trying not to notice how tired I looked in the hallway mirror. We found seats at the long wooden table, crowded but familiar. I told myself I'd eat, make light conversation, and go home early. The first half of the evening passed just like that. Safe topics, mild jokes, nods at old stories. I didn't speak much, just observed. But I could feel it brewing. It started with someone griping about gas prices. Another chimed in about property taxes. Then a third, glass in hand, said, "Don't even get me started on credit card debt. That's where they really get you." Laughter rippled around the table. My wife leaned forward with her wine and said almost breezily, "Well, we've paid off so much in the last 2 years, I've stopped counting." She didn't say he paid. She said we. I glanced at her but said nothing. I just nodded. She kept going, as if reading from a script. We refinanced twice, negotiated interest, chipped away every month. I mean, it's not easy, but when you've got someone like this guy... She nudged her elbow toward me without looking. "Things get done." They chuckled politely. I smiled with my mouth, not my eyes. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, she tilted her head, giggled, and said, "Honestly, I hit the jackpot. He's the cow of the century, keeps giving, and never complains." Silence. It was one of those comments that hits the room like a dish shattering on the floor. A few people laughed, short, confused noises, unsure whether it was really a joke. One woman tried to soften it with a smile in my direction. I sat very still. My hands were folded neatly in my lap. I didn't look at anyone. I didn't say a word. It was like my body knew if I moved, I might shatter. Someone changed the subject, real estate or a new restaurant. I can't remember. The conversation resumed, but the heat in my chest didn't go anywhere. I kept playing the moment back, the lift in her voice, the way her eyes darted around for attention, the timing of her sip after the punchline. That wasn't thoughtless. That was deliberate. The cow of the century. I didn't even get a name, just a label, and they all heard it. I scanned the table. Sheila, our host, looked at her plate. Mark stared into his drink. Nobody said anything. Nobody pulled her aside. No one called it out. Their silence wasn't loud. It was practiced. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Sometimes silence means approval, or at least acceptance. Maybe they'd heard things like that from her before. Maybe they didn't think I'd mind. Maybe they thought I already knew what I was. I sat through dessert without tasting it. Someone passed me a fork and I took it. Someone else asked if I wanted coffee, and I nodded. I smiled at the right times and made a comment about how good the pie turned out. But inside, something shifted. Not rage, not even heartbreak, just a solid, heavy awareness that stayed exactly where it landed. She never brought it up again. Not on the car ride home, not when we got in, not when we brushed our teeth side by side in silence. She hummed as she changed into pajamas, like nothing had happened, but it had. And I knew it wasn't a joke, and it wasn't an accident. The next few days passed like I was walking underwater. Everything looked familiar, but there was this slow-motion detachment, like I was watching my life from the outside. I still woke up before dawn, still packed my lunch in the brown paper bags she bought in bulk, still kissed her cheek as I left. But there was a pause in me, like I was waiting for something I couldn't name. That night, I got home later than usual. One of the guys had asked me to cover a shift at the storage facility. I didn't want the overtime, but I took it anyway. It gave me an excuse to stay out, avoid eye contact, avoid conversation. The driveway was quiet. Her car was already parked, lights off. It looked like every other night. Inside, only the hallway light near the kitchen was on, dim, flickering a little. I pushed the door open softly, kicked my shoes off by muscle memory, and rubbed the back of my neck. The ache there had become constant, like a weight I was learning to live with. I didn't expect to hear anything. It was nearly midnight. Usually, she'd be asleep by now with the TV still humming low in our room, blanket kicked off one leg. But as I turned down the hall toward the kitchen, I heard her voice. Not loud, not panicked, just talking. I stopped. I couldn't see her yet, but I could hear her pacing slowly, her bare feet making that familiar shuffle against the tile. Then another voice, on speaker. A woman, someone from work maybe, or one of her sisters. I couldn't tell. I stayed still, just long enough to recognize the tone. My wife was laughing, not a cackle, not a snort, just that light, controlled chuckle she used when she felt clever, or in control. "No, I'm serious," she said, words flowing smooth, easy. "He doesn't ask questions, ever. He just pays. It's kind of amazing, actually." A pause on the line. Then she continued, "If he knew half the stuff I've managed with his name on it. But he won't. That's the thing. He doesn't want to know." I didn't breathe. I didn't move. There was no edge in her voice, no frustration, no fear of being caught. She sounded like she was bragging. Think about it, she went on. I get to live exactly how I want, and he feels like he's doing the noble thing. It's like win-win. More laughter. From her. From whoever was on the other end. I stood there in the dark hallway, hands still on my keys. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe a change in her tone, a disclaimer. Something like, "But I love him, though." It never came. What came instead was the one line I would carry in my chest like a cold stone. He's not really a husband. He's a resource. Silence followed. She'd moved further into the kitchen now, probably grabbing a glass of wine or something sweet. The voice on the phone lowered, hard to make out, but it didn't matter. The words had landed. Fully. Clearly. I didn't step forward. I didn't say her name. I didn't make a sound. Because in that moment, I wasn't a man in a marriage anymore. I was a man staring into the truth and seeing nothing stare back. I always thought if I ever heard something like that, if I ever caught her in some kind of betrayal, I'd explode, scream, throw something, demand answers, demand dignity. But I didn't feel rage. I felt absence, like the floor had given way, not with a crash, but with silence. I turned and walked quietly back toward the door, stepping over the same spot where my shoes still sat, untouched. I slipped them on, not fully registering it, and walked back out to the porch. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that clings to your shirt and makes everything feel slower. I sat on the top step, hands in my lap, eyes fixed on nothing. I wasn't thinking about leaving. I wasn't thinking about staying. I was just registering that she had been this way for longer than I knew, that I hadn't been her partner for a long time, maybe ever, that all the sacrifices I thought meant something might have just been convenient. Eventually, the porch light flicked on above me. She must have noticed I wasn't in bed, but she didn't come out. I didn't go back in, not right away. I stayed outside until the bugs quieted and the breeze picked up. When I finally walked back inside, the kitchen was empty, the light off. She had gone to bed, as if nothing had happened. And maybe for her, it hadn't. I stood at the threshold of our room, looking at her back turned toward the wall, her breathing slow and steady. I didn't say a word. I didn't even change out of my clothes. I just laid down next to her, on top of the covers, eyes open, heart numb. I didn't confront her that night. But I never slept the same again. Something inside me shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, unmistakable turn, like the way the air changes before a storm. You can't see it, but your bones know it's coming. The next few days unfolded slower than usual, like time was asking permission to keep moving. I didn't change much on the outside. I still poured the coffee, folded the laundry, showed up to work on time. But I wasn't living in the house anymore. I was observing it, quietly, deliberately. She didn't notice the difference, or maybe she didn't care to. Her tone stayed light. Her footsteps still matched the rhythm of a woman in control. But I had stopped answering her with my usual softness. I wasn't giving her silence out of surrender. I was giving it shape, purpose. Because speaking too soon, that's how you warn a snake you've seen it. And snakes don't leave when they've been seen. They coil tighter. I told myself I wasn't avoiding the problem. I was preparing for it. 3 days later, I got off my shift at the warehouse and decided to stop by the house during my break. She was out, her car gone, maybe at the salon, or out with one of her sisters, the ones who always spoke to me with eyes that wandered. I wasn't sure. I just knew the house was quiet, and I needed that. I walked into the den and opened the mail basket she usually handled. I wasn't looking for anything. At least, that's what I told myself. That's when I saw it. A packet of documents tucked beneath some credit card offers and a flyer for a lawn service we'd never use. I pulled it out. Legal-sized envelope. Her handwriting in the corner. Inside were refinance papers for the house. My name was there. Bold. Signed. I stared at it like it belonged to another man. The date was from last month. During the week I had been in Dallas for a work training. I didn't remember signing anything before I left, certainly nothing about refinancing. But there it was. A signature. Mine. Only it didn't look quite right. The curve of the R was off. The J in my last name didn't hook the way I always wrote it. My heart didn't race. It slowed. I read the pages over and over. Language I didn't fully understand, but enough to see numbers. Big ones, percentages, terms, something about asset protection. It didn't look like a mistake. It looked like a plan. I sat there on the edge of the couch for maybe 15 minutes, staring at the document like it might blink first. And then I remembered the phone number on the bottom corner. Some lawyer's office in Midtown. I folded the paper carefully and slid it into my work folder. The next morning, instead of driving straight to the warehouse, I took a left off Richmond Avenue and parked outside a narrow brick building sandwiched between a tax place and a bakery, a small law office. I sat in the car for a full 5 minutes before going in. I wasn't nervous. I was calculating. The woman at the front desk looked up and gave me a polite smile. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but I just need someone to take a quick look at something. I can wait if I have to." She nodded and offered me a seat. I pulled the document from my folder, folded just once across the middle. It looked like any other paper, legal, dull, lifeless. A man in a blue shirt and loosened tie came out 10 minutes later. He couldn't have been more than 35. Kind eyes, though. I followed him into a small office that smelled like coffee and printer toner. He read through the first few pages. Didn't say much. Then he paused. "Did you sign this?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." He looked at the signature again, then at me. "This authorizes a transfer of equity from your name into a trust held solely by your wife. It's structured carefully." He didn't finish the sentence, but his eyes did. "What happens," I asked, voice level, "if I didn't agree to it?" He didn't answer right away, just leaned back in his chair, gave a long exhale through his nose. "This isn't something you walk away from quietly," he said finally. "Not without losing something." I nodded, stood up, thanked him. He offered to refer me to someone. I told him I'd think about it. That evening, I sat in my truck behind the warehouse after clocking out. The sun was bleeding down over the city, streaks of red and burnt orange cutting through the skyline like scars. I watched people come and go in the parking lot, laughing, tired, ready to go home. Home. That word didn't land the same anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't break anything. I didn't call her. Instead, I took out a small notepad from the glove box and wrote down a single sentence. "Check the bank account." I didn't even finish the sentence with punctuation. Just let it hang there, waiting. Because now I understood something deep, quiet, and permanent. Silence had bought me time, but not much. If I waited too long, I'd lose leverage. If I moved too soon, I'd lose control. That's when I understood. Doing nothing was no longer an option, but acting too fast could ruin everything. The next morning, I woke up with a knot already sitting in my stomach. Not the anxious kind, this was different, like my body was warning me, be ready. I moved slower than usual, but not from fatigue. I was calculating each step, each look, each silence. The house felt colder, not in temperature, but in tone. She hummed in the kitchen, same as she always did when making coffee, but the melody didn't land the same. There was a rhythm to it, but no warmth behind it. She didn't say much that morning. Neither did I. I left for work 30 minutes early. Not because I had more to do, but because the quiet in that house had started to sound like a loaded gun. By the time I reached the loading dock, something felt off. My usual guys, Rodney, Miguel, even Terry from shipping, they weren't quite themselves. A few nodded at me but didn't say much. Conversation stopped when I approached. Eyes flickered, then looked away. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Just a ripple from everything going on at home. But by lunch break, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I passed a couple of folks near the vending machines, heard just enough before they hushed up. I mean, that's not what she told me. She said he... Then they saw me and froze. I didn't stop walking, didn't turn around, just kept going down the corridor like none of it mattered. But inside, I was already trying to piece it together. Back at my locker, I scrolled through my phone. 2 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. A message from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in months. Hey man, you okay? Heard some things. Just checking in. Heard some things. It wasn't hard to guess who'd started telling them. Later that day, I saw it written on a coworker's face. She gave me a tight smile, then leaned in just enough to say, I don't know what's going on, but you might want to get ahead of it. I nodded, thanked her, and got back to work. That evening, I sat in my truck outside the grocery store for a full half hour before driving home. I didn't want to walk through that door knowing I'd been reduced to whispers, not from mistakes I'd made, but from a story someone else was crafting in real time. And then it came. A call from my sister, direct and sharp. She says you're unstable, that you've been pushing her about the money, controlling everything. She said she's scared of what you might do next. The words hit like a slap. Not because they were true, because I knew how carefully they'd been chosen. Scared, unstable, controlling. Words that cut fast and left no room for defense. I didn't even try to explain, not to my sister, not to anyone, because I remembered something. Once people choose a side, explanations just sound like damage control. So I stayed quiet. But this time, it wasn't retreat. It was calculation. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, documents spread out. I reviewed everything: refinance papers, credit authorizations, emails she'd printed but left in the drawer. At first, it all looked airtight. Then I found it. A single page, unsigned, tucked between 2 folders. It listed my name as a co-signer for a secondary account, but there was no actual signature. The timestamp on the email that submitted the form was dated the same day I was out of town for a client delivery. No proxy, no witness. Just her assumption I wouldn't look that deep. She'd crafted the story of a man who was unstable, impulsive, dangerous, but she hadn't double-checked her own trail, and now I had something she didn't count on, a discrepancy. The next morning, I walked into work like nothing had changed. I kept my head down, let the rumors build, let the people talk, let her keep weaving the tale. Because I now understood, this wasn't just about love lost or trust broken. This was about erasure. She wasn't just trying to leave me. She was trying to redefine me before I even had the chance to speak. And that realization did something permanent. It killed hesitation. She had chosen her weapon, words. But I had something she couldn't control anymore. Facts, silence, and now, intent. If she wanted a public version of me, I was finally ready to give one. I wasn't angry anymore. That's how I knew I was ready. There was a strange calm that morning, like the kind that settles in after a storm has passed, but before the damage is tallied. No racing thoughts, no shaky hands, just clarity. Cold, steady, intentional. I shaved, put on a clean shirt, took time with my coffee. Not because I was stalling, but because I wanted my mind and body aligned. No part of me was dragging the other. This wasn't about getting back at her. It was about correcting the story before it hardened into history. I had called a meeting the day before, neutral ground, a professional office space downtown with glass walls, witness seating, and a built-in record of everything said and done. I didn't tell her much, just that there were matters that needed clarification, the kind of phrasing that made it sound routine. But this wasn't routine. I arrived 10 minutes early, sat in the conference room while the assistant adjusted the thermostat and laid out a pitcher of water. I didn't pace. I didn't check my phone. I waited. She walked in a few minutes later, holding her purse like a shield and wearing that familiar, strained smile she used when she was pretending nothing was wrong. I nodded politely. She sat. There were two others in the room, my legal advisor and hers. No shouting, no surprise guests, just space for truth. She spoke first. Before we start, I just want to say none of this has been easy. I've been under a lot of pressure, and I know things got complicated, but I hope we can be civil. Her voice carried that practiced vulnerability. Just enough quiver to sound sincere, not enough to appear weak. She was preparing the ground, planting a narrative, one that cast her as reasonable and me as a man unraveling under imagined betrayals. She went on. I've tried to be patient, but you've made it hard. The financial paranoia, the need to control every decision. I didn't want to involve anyone else, but I've been advised to protect myself. I said nothing, just opened the folder I brought and laid it in front of me. Do you remember this form? I asked, sliding the first page forward. She glanced at it, then gave a little laugh. Of course, that was the refinancing. Why? Look at the signature. She leaned in, looked closer. I signed that. No, I said calmly. You did. My name is printed, but that's not my signature. She frowned, looked at her lawyer, then back at me. You must have forgotten. We were both there. I slid out the email record. Date stamped. Location tagged. I was in Amarillo for a delivery that entire day. I have the gas receipts. The client confirmed it. The room got quiet. I kept going page by page, one document after another, dates that didn't align, signatures missing. Her paper trail wasn't just sloppy. It was rushed. She hadn't expected anyone to check. She was used to me trusting her. Then came the one that broke the silence. A transfer authorization. $10,000 moved from our joint account to a private one under her name. The memo line read, "Consulting, personal." She had marked it as a mutual agreement. No text, no call, just the transaction. She reached for the document, but I held it firm. You built a story, I said quietly, and you built it fast, but you didn't check the cracks. You focused on the performance, not the paperwork. Her mouth opened slightly. No words came. She looked at her lawyer again. This time, there was no cover in his eyes. Just a professional blankness, the kind you use when realizing the story you were sold doesn't hold. The room began to shift, not physically, but in tone. Her lawyer adjusted his glasses, flipped through a few pages, then said, without looking up, "Can we pause a moment? I'd like a word with my client." She didn't move. She just stared at me like she'd never seen me before. And maybe she hadn't, because I had stopped reacting. I had stopped playing the role of the quietly shamed husband trying to make peace. I had become a mirror, one that didn't blink, didn't flinch, and didn't apologize. She tried to reach for her narrative again. "I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how to ask for help without looking weak. You've always been so calm, so composed. It's hard to talk to someone who never loses it." I didn't reply. Her words weren't for clarity. They were for cover. The old dance of shifting blame to the silence of the other. When the short break ended, options were laid out. There could be arbitration, a private agreement, or a full legal proceeding, which neither party wanted, though I was now in a position to decide. I chose the middle ground. Quiet, binding, clean. It wasn't about revenge. It was about the future. As we stood to leave, she looked at me again, longer this time. "You really had all this for how long?" "Long enough," I said, adjusting my coat. "Long enough to stop hoping you'd tell the truth first." By the time I reached the parking garage, the air felt different. Not lighter exactly, but clearer, like a door had been shut behind me and I had no need to look back. I drove home, didn't turn on the radio, didn't think about what tomorrow looked like. Just drove, letting silence settle. That night, I stood in the kitchen with a glass of water, staring out the window. I had done what needed to be done, but the hardest part wasn't winning. It was deciding what came next. The morning after that final meeting, I woke up in a quiet apartment. Mine. A small place, nothing fancy, but every inch of it was my own. No shared closets, no folded lies tucked into kitchen drawers, just space, stillness. Winning didn't feel like I thought it would. There was no rush of triumph, no cathartic shouting or fist pumping in the mirror. It was quieter than I imagined, like finishing a long hike and realizing the view wasn't the point. It was being able to take your shoes off and rest without fear. The apartment walls were still bare. The fridge had more bottles of water than food. I hadn't bothered with curtains yet, so the early sun came in hard and bright, hitting the floor in long, silent stripes. I didn't have to explain where I was going that day, or why I needed a moment alone, or justify a quiet breakfast at the diner around the corner. The booth I liked was open, tucked in the far corner, near the window. The waitress, a woman named Beth I'd seen a few times before, refilled my coffee without asking. "New haircut?" she asked casually. "Nope, just new, everything else," I said, half smiling. She didn't press. Older folks know when not to pry. She nodded and walked away, like maybe she'd heard that kind of answer before. The truth is, I wasn't looking for sympathy. What I had now wasn't happiness. Not exactly. It was space. And space can be unnerving when you're used to being crowded by noise, needs, and the emotional clutter of someone else's agenda. There were still calls to return, legal confirmations to review, the last bits of shared property to divide. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow administrative grind. No slammed doors, no final screaming matches. Just signatures, deadlines, quiet logistics. But with every task checked off, I could feel something heavy lifting. The kind of weight you forget you're carrying until it's gone. I didn't get the house, didn't want it. It had stopped feeling like a home long before I left it. I'd rather live in a place with fewer memories and more possibility. I did keep the truck. Not because of sentiment, but because it ran well and reminded me of simpler things. Hauling lumber, driving out to my dad's old place, taking a long back road just to clear my head. About a week after everything wrapped, I stood in front of the mirror shaving and caught myself humming. It was faint, absent-minded, but real. That's when it hit me. I was no longer watching my back. No longer walking on eggshells in my own kitchen. I didn't have to decode silence or second-guess every sentence for the twist behind it. Freedom didn't look like a vacation. It looked like making eggs in the morning and not hearing passive-aggressive sighs behind you. It looked like sitting on the courthouse steps afterward, waiting for the clerk to stamp the last document, watching families walk by with messy lives and imperfect truths, but at least truths. I thought about what I'd lost: time, money, a version of myself I thought was built on patience. But in the aftermath, I started asking a different question. What had I allowed? I wasn't blameless. That much was clear. Somewhere along the way, I'd confused being dependable with being disposable. I kept showing up, kept giving more, thinking it was love, thinking endurance made the relationship worthy. But endurance without balance is just slow self-erasure. I didn't hate her, but I didn't want to fix her either. And that, more than anything, was the proof I was healing. A few mornings later, while clearing out the last box I'd brought from the old house, I found something unexpected: an old grocery list, written in her handwriting, crumpled, coffee-stained, barely legible, but there it was: almond milk, batteries, wrapping paper, and my name, next to a note. Remind him to fix the sink. Years ago, I would have seen that as normal, maybe even sweet. Now, it landed differently, not bitter, just telling. I folded it once and tossed it. That small act felt like finishing something unfinished, not with anger, but acceptance. I wasn't looking for someone to blame anymore. I was building a new framework, one where strength wasn't how much I could hold. It was how clearly I could define what I would no longer carry. People around my age, especially the ones who've lived through enough, know that growth doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it's just knowing when not to repeat a lesson you've already learned. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks you control. I won't be anyone's fallback plan again. I won't be the peacekeeper at the cost of my own peace. I won't explain away red flags out of fear of starting over. These aren't resolutions. They're just facts. When I paid the check at the diner that morning, Beth looked up and said, "See you tomorrow?" "Maybe," I said, "or maybe next week. I'm not on anyone's schedule anymore." She smiled. "That's a good place to be." She was right. As I walked out into the morning air, brisk, clean, sun not too high yet, I took a deep breath. Not to calm myself, just to feel something fully. I stopped being anyone's ATM the day I finally learned my worth wasn't something you earn, it's something you protect.